It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. I am looking forward to talking with my guest today. Joining me is Nic Poulos. Nic is founder of Bowery Capital, which they call a thesis-driven, early-stage investor backing exceptional founders, modernizing business through technology. He's an active blogger as well as the host of a great podcast himself, Bowery Capital Sales Podcast. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of their guests they have. And Nic, welcome to Accelerate.
Thanks, Andy. Great to be here.
So please take a minute, introduce yourself. How'd you get your start in business? How'd you end up where you are?
Certainly. So as you mentioned, today I am a venture investor with Bowery Capital. So we are a VC that focuses exclusively on enterprise software. So predominantly SaaS, all businesses selling into the enterprise. I've been in venture capital now for about 6 years. I'm based out of New York. Prior to Bowery, myself as well as my colleague Mike served as the investment team for AOL Ventures, which is the VC arm of AOL, which I hope everyone is still familiar with. and
You've got mail.
Exactly. We did a few other things there outside of that You've Got Mail recording and the ubiquitous CDs that I'm sure everyone has received over the years. Mm-hmm. We actually did a lot of ad tech there. Prior to my role in AOL Ventures, served in a business development function primarily focused on the ad tech stack that AOL began to build out and continues to build out quite robustly. And prior to that, I spent several years in investment banking focused on software M&A. So that's my career in a nutshell.
In a nutshell. So what sort of attracted you to the SaaS space as an investor? I mean, you certainly had a choice of where you could have focused.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, to some extent, you develop certain expertise. I began in software banking and did a lot of ad technology, which was kind of at the height of its excitement when I was in that career, and had the chance to join AOL and see a variety of enterprise technologies around advertising and marketing. Since then, obviously, I have gravitated towards SaaS. I think overall, enterprise is an extremely exciting space for somebody who enjoys understanding the latest technologies and how they can have an impact on the way that modern business is done. If you think about AI or Internet of Things and connected devices, mm-hmm. or the cutting edge of mobile, these are all things that multi-billion-dollar companies with huge budgets want to put to work to have their impact on the economy. And so you see really some of the most interesting applications of these emerging technologies in the enterprise. I think obviously there are very cool things going on in the consumer world as well, but SaaS in particular, I think, has been a real revolution. You've gone over the course of 15 or so years from there being 5 major provisioners of IT to the enterprise to now we have hundreds of new cloud applications being created and sold in enterprise every year. It's cheaper and faster than ever to start these companies. And certainly cloud deployment is one reason. Another reason is cheaper cloud infrastructure and storage. But I just think it's also access. I mean, imagine how many tools that you can go out and find to help you do your job better for $10 a month or even free. It's really just, it's been an amazing opportunity, not only for those IT buyers, but for entrepreneurs and hence for investors like me.
And I think one of the things that's really happened in that same period that you talked of, over the last 15 years, let's say, is that the enterprise is much less concerned about a brand name in terms of buying a solution from a company. Or before, got to go back to the days when I was working for startups and we were selling sort of mission critical communications systems into very large corporations. The biggest hurdle we had to overcome initially was no one knew who we were.
Yep.
And this reluctance to buy from sort of unknown quantity. And it seems like that's diminished quite a bit. I mean, the perceived risk of doing business with a company like that seems to have gone down.
I think you're right. There's the old adage, you don't get fired for buying IBM.
Believe me, I was on the receiving end of that many times, by the way, just FYI. I mean, that used to be frustrating to the extreme where I'd go in thinking I'd closed a deal on somebody and they said, well, we bought from IBM because, sales rep said. It's like, seriously.
Yeah. And it's definitely still in effect, but yeah, I think you're right. You're seeing a lot of enterprises recognize that finding earlier, more cutting edge technologies that may mean that you're taking a little bit more risk as the company doesn't maybe have as much operating history, but it's also a source of innovation for them. So you're right. I think that's opening up, and it's been a real positive, I think, for the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think given the fact it's cloud-based, I mean, the cost of implementation and the cost of switching, if there is a mistake, are substantially lower than it was if a hosted solution, let's say, for a big enterprise software play.
Exactly. Less implementation, hopefully less upfront cost, and the ability to have your product be continually upgraded has really become a boon.
Yeah, and that lower switching cost is a positive and a minus because you have to focus much more on making sure the customer actually derives the value from the investment they're getting. So hence the rise of the customer success teams.
Exactly.
So in one of your recent interviews with a guest from Gigya, he had talked about how, and I think you concurred with this, is that you said sales is not an art. And I thought that was interesting. So certainly the science of selling has improved dramatically over this past 10, 15 years, the growth of the predictable revenue model and so on. But interesting question, because I get asked this a lot, is there no room for craft or the art of sales anymore? And what's the blend?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the podcast that I did with Ken Poulos, who's the VP of sales over at Gigya, we were talking about the proof of concept phase of a deal, where you don't have a full-time contract signed, but you're putting a product in a customer's hands. And the takeaway that I got from him was, if you don't set your milestones, if you don't have mutually agreed upon goals and commitments, if you don't have a set light at the end of the tunnel and when that's coming, you don't put all the structure around it, you're setting yourself up for scope creep. You're setting yourself up for pursuing non-ideal customers. So I think in that regard, extending that out to the entire sales funnel, sales, especially sales of technology products, has become much more systematized. We can extract a lot more data from the process in order to optimize it. There are tons of tools that can help you organize your data, get more data in your customers, qualify your leads better, et cetera. But to try to answer your question, I think that craft is never going to go away in sales. I think the one prime example I'll just give real quick is I just completed another podcast that we'll release in a few weeks with Heather Morgan, who runs a company called Salesfolk.
Right, email expert, right? Exactly,
and it's literally about crafting cold emails. And when you think about the systematization of sales, you think about these mass cold emailing campaigns that are optimized for conversion, and you would think that's not an art, but it still really is. A big takeaway of Heather's was, at the end of the day, these communications have to be about your customer and what they want and how they talk. And so I think we traditionally think about old school salespeople as very artistic, high EQ people persons, and I think what we're starting to learn is high conversion, the data is telling us high conversion really comes from that understanding of your customer. So I think the data is almost proving out to some extent that sales is an art. It's about understanding people. So I think they can both flourish together.
Well, it's good to hear because I certainly believe so. I mean, I think that I call it sort of I use the analogy of like the last mile problem that they had in telecoms. That's how do I? Mm-hmm. It's easy to get the line to the central office, but how do I get it to the home from there? That last mile, and I think people sort of have that same issue with sales. Is gosh, we're getting really good at getting to that central office point, that point of presence, but then at some point, a person has to talk to a person and make that happen. And yep. I mean, obviously, there's some products that are self-service completely, but we're talking in the enterprise space. It seems like we're getting some people that are just sort of ignoring that. I'm seeing, people think they will just be able to sort of ignore that last mile, and I think it's gonna always be there, as you said. I think that's the art's never going to go away completely.
Yeah, I think you can't disintermediate, the human element to some extent. That doesn't mean you can't use all the data and all the tools to optimize your communications. But if you don't understand what your customer's real pain point is and what's going to make them want to make that purchase, your conversion is going to be bad. And part of that is the human element of just understanding your customer.
Yeah. All right. Well, you also win a prize for using my favorite word, which is disintermediate.
Excellent.
We'll send that to you after the show. That's great. So further with your conversation with Ken, though, I thought it was a great conversation about proof of concepts. So how often are you finding those selling into enterprise that it has to be done? I mean, is it purely a function of the maturity of the product, or are you finding that it's more the size of or relevant to or dependent, on the size of the deal? What are sort of the keys that are triggering that?
So I think you kind of nailed the two things, to be honest with you. The maturity of the product. So if you have a product you're selling into a large enterprise, they are, especially if you're an earlier company, they're taking somewhat of a risk on you in that they're going to invest, if you've structured your conversation correctly, they're going to invest time into testing your product. Mm-hmm. They're going to stick their neck out on the line with their colleagues, and they're going to have to use it. I mean, but what you want to do is, basically find a way to structure this test period, this POC, so that they see this value as quickly as possible. As your company becomes more mature, you start getting referral clients. You have mind share with your brand. You have people who can just say it's a security product. A CISO talks to a CISO. One says this product is killing it for us. You got to have it. You may not have to do a POC. Mm-hmm. So the maturity is definitely one thing. As you said, the contract size or the ACV is another important one. As you mentioned before, lots of freemium or self-service products out there that simply don't offer POCs, and their business model couldn't support it for CAC reasons. But if you're selling, in general, I think it's a good rule of thumb. I mean, if you're selling a product that's a several $100,000 deal, anyone, big companies especially, are going to expect to be able to try it out. Just how it is. So
a question that I encounter a lot with from clients that I work with and companies that, listeners to the show and so on, has to do with charging for proof of concept, for trials. And my background when products I sold is even from startup. We thought if the customer wouldn't pay for the trial, then they weren't a qualified prospect. Mm-hmm. So what are you seeing as sort of best practices in the spaces you work in?
Sure. I think the first thing you have to look at is what is the cost to you in order to do whatever this POC equivalent you're considering is. If it costs you a lot of money, if you have to do any sort of custom integrations, if you have to spend a lot of time in sales engineering type of activities, etc., it's reasonable to expect that you may ask for a sort of effectively a mini implementation fee or a paid pilot. If your deal size is very big, if you're selling a, again, 2-year deal for several $100,000, you're not going to spend, 3 months with a large client servicing them for nothing. But if your product is, a SaaS product that you can simply give somebody access to, and your incremental costs are largely just cloud infrastructure, you can maybe afford to try to make it less frictionless. I think it depends on your business, and you're right. Figuring out what it is that qualifies that customer is key. What Ken from Gig you mentioned in our podcast is the key to POCs is mutual commitment.
Sure.
So if that commitment is payment, or if that commitment is time, or if that commitment is engagement and giving you data, you just need to figure out what it is that properly qualifies your lead, or indicates that they value your product, and go with that.
Yeah, I thought Ken's guidelines were good. If people didn't hear that, encourage you to go back and listen to the episode on Nick's podcast. But in terms of mutual commitment, mutual engagement, but my experience has always been that the way we enforced those commitments and engagements is they put some skin into the game. Mm-hmm. Because, otherwise it's not one of their priorities. How do you make it a priority internally that they commit the resources is, give us a little money.
Yeah, I think, if you just think about a company internally, if you have a product that is, if you're selling a $30,000 a year ACV for a SaaS product with not much implementation, you're not going to go to them and say, okay, why don't you give us 10 grand for a pilot? Because what's the justification for that? And qualification bars may not be quite as high. If you're going to spend a lot of time with a customer pursuing a 2-year, $500,000 deal, they're just going to, a qualified customer for a purchase that big is going to have more, they should be putting more into this, and therefore it shouldn't be a big deal for them to pay, five figures for a pilot for 3 months. So,
yeah, well, I think the other factor you include in, and then we'll move on to another topic, which is, because I agree, you have to factor those things in, is really the cost of what you charge for the pilot should relate to the value they're going to receive, as opposed to necessarily the cost, right? The price.
Mm-hmm.
So
exactly.
if it's somebody that's going to get fairly strong realized value out of their investment in your service, then the ability to charge for the pilot, and you want to do that, I think, because again, then you'll devote the resources, they'll devote the resources as well. But no, it's a great conversation. People should go back and listen to that. So another question I guess I had for you is really from a sort of investor's perspective is gosh, there's been this enormous growth in amount of sales technologies, SaaS-based, cloud-based sales technologies over the past few years. It seems like we went from, a couple dozen entries to hundreds, literally hundreds. What do you see going on in those spaces? Do you see that some of this is, overserved markets at this point? Do you see a shakeout coming? And then the second part of the question we'll talk about is made some emerging trends you see in this space.
Sure. There's been, I'd say over the last 3 or 4 years, there's been a pretty huge upswing in sales tech or sales automation. I think obviously you can point to the emergence of CRMs as kind of the impetus to some extent, because you give companies a platform to collect data about their customers and their deals and their sales, and now you have some data to play with. So now we have this data. How do we figure out how to better qualify people? So you see the emergence of predictive analytics companies to better qualify leads or move them through the funnel. Or how do we figure out, who our best reps are, who our worst reps are? So you see, tools around BI like Insight Squared that help you there. Or how do we generate leads in the first place? So you see companies like Lead Genius and Ranking emerge, which I think has been great for the industry. And any modern, especially SaaS seller, will tell you having the stack that works for you with probably at least 10 or 15 of these tools is critical. I think you're right, though. It's a problem. The various pain points you experience in sales, be it lead gen, qualification, demos, collateral sharing, webinars, customer success, etc., are a pain point that a lot of people experience because there are a lot of salespeople in the startup tech ecosystem. Therefore, a lot of people try to solve that problem. It's the same reason why we see a lot of startups trying to solve the email problem. That doesn't necessarily correlate with how big the pain point is, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the big question I always try to keep a finger on the pulse of is how much budget is actually going to sales automation technology. And I think you do reach a point at which you question, how much more money, basically, are we getting diminishing returns on investing in, some of these technologies? I think we're seeing a lot of startups that risk being features rather than lasting platform businesses. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think to wrap up, I think you're right. We have and we'll start to see more consolidation from some of the larger players in the space, be it Salesforce, an obvious one to point to, or Inside Sales, or Five9, or some of the CSMs like Gainsight and Tatango.
Right.
And so I do think we'll see a good amount of consolidation. And I think the question for me is just how much budget are you really accessing with the pain point you're trying to solve?
Well, one of the impressions, and this is interesting to get your perspective on this, is I was at the SaaStr conference in February in San Francisco. I don't know if you were there, but I went around and talked to all the vendors that were on the display and sort of talking about what they're doing, who they're selling to, and so on. At the end of the conference, having made my rounds and talked to everybody, was like, this is sort of interesting. It's like they're all selling to each other. It's like their target market is each other, which seems sort of problematic because the first downturn we have, and serious downturn, let's say bubble bursting, if God forbid, is which is going to be sort of mass casualties. It's so. What do you see in terms of how they, sort of broaden their focus beyond just purely the tech bubble and who they sell to? Because even listening to the presentations there, it seemed like so many of the sales automation companies, their target market was tech. And it's like, that's great, but there's all sorts of companies that could utilize this.
Yeah, that's something, honestly, we think about a lot, which is, is this a product that only solves a problem for Silicon Valley? And when you're inside of that bubble, and the same could apply to, is this a product, we see the same thing in New York, both for tech companies and for real estate companies, et cetera. Mm-hmm. To build a big business, you have to be applicable to more than just growth stage SaaS companies that are early adopters and that will pay for all this stuff. So if you look at the companies that have built large businesses purely in sales automation so far, they provide tools like either you kind of seek to be a full stack sales platform, or you provide something that can be applicable to more than just technology companies. We have a company in our portfolio called Channelize that looks to optimize indirect sales or channel sales. And, that's technology, but it also applies to, a ton of other industries, even if you just think about healthcare and pharma, right?
Exactly.
So I think that is a very important consideration. And we definitely do, if you see a, startup, and it's obviously great to see that you have, whatever it is, Atlassian and, Uber and whatnot as customers, but we do take it with a little bit of a grain of salt because we know these are also some of the most forward-thinking companies in the world, and to be a truly large business, you gotta sell the rest of us.
Yeah. Oh, good. Okay. Well, glad to hear you say that. We're going to move into the last segment of my show where I've got some standard questions I ask all my guests. And in this first one, it's a hypothetical scenario in that in this scenario, you, Nick, have just been hired as the new sales leader, VP of sales at a company whose sales have stalled out. And CEO, board really anxious for you to start making impact, turn things around. So what two things could you do your first week on the job that could have the biggest impact?
Yeah, I think that the first thing is ensuring you really understand the mechanics of your sales funnel. I've seen innumerable companies that are having trouble hitting bookings targets, and they look to their sales reps and say, "Why aren't you hitting targets?" And they replace them. And then you've got to ramp up another salesperson, and then you get back to the same problem. And maybe the problem was you actually don't have enough leads to begin with, or you're not properly qualifying your leads. So if you don't start with the right infrastructure and understand, okay, how are we actually generating leads? Once you get to the MQS, QL level, how are we actually qualifying leads? What actually makes an opportunity, and what are we including in pipeline? And then how do we close, and the various conversion rates amongst all those. It's hard for you to build up from a bookings target to understand how many leads you actually need. So it could be your reps, but it also just could be your leads. But if you don't have the data and you don't understand, then you don't understand where the weaknesses in your funnel are. So I guess that's probably the main number one thing that I would do is understand where that weakness in your funnel is. I think the second is, you could look at your funnel and maybe just everything looks weak. And at the end of the day, you need to talk with people that are using your product and understand why it is they bought it. We invest our first checks in at the seed stage, and that's often when there are maybe a few customers, but it's critical at that stage to really understand. I mean, you're looking over the next year or so to understand what your product market fit is, and you've got to go from, hey, we know we're solving this pain point, to this is exactly the person in exactly the type of organization that we're looking for, and here's how they buy it. And here's how we can, meet that need scalably with our sales and marketing teams. And so how you do that is talking with as many of your customers as you can. Hopefully you already have a few of those and you have a few champions, and spend time with those people. I mean, those are the people that have invested in your product and see value in it. If those people exist, there's got to be more of them. So understand what that ideal customer profile is, by talking with the people that you have. If you think about it, the cheapest and highest converting lead you can get out there is a referral customer.
Right.
And, so where does that come from? Again, your existing customers and users. So, trying to get closer to product market fit by talking to existing customers or users would be the second thing I would say would be critical.
Okay, great answer. So, this rapid fire questions? Give me one word answers. You can elaborate if you wish. So, who's your sales role model?
Sales role model. That's a tough question. I think at the end of the day, there are a lot of folks out there who have come up with amazing sales frameworks or written amazing books. It's kind of hard to just choose one, to be honest with you. I think I can point to one of the most insightful sales leaders that I've had a chance to speak with recently. This is a guy that's very close with our firm, His name is Mark Roberge.
Sure. No Mark well.
Yeah, he's, people could be familiar with him from his time at HubSpot. He's also wrote a book called The Sales Acceleration Formula. He also does a little bit of lecturing at HBS. I think that Mark has been a great friend of Bowery, and just has a kind of holistic view on the sales process that that I think has you see a lot of sales leaders who specialize in one particular area and just excel, but stepping back and understanding how that works is another story. I think that Mark has gotten there. And then I guess in addition, because I don't have a perfect go-to answer, maybe I'll also add one other person.
Sure. Go ahead.
I think the classic 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that everyone has heard of the book. It's fairly old. Covey, it was written by Stephen Covey in I think the late 80s. If you read that book, it is not. It seems like it's cheesy, but honestly, there's a reason why so many people talk about it. It's worth a read, and it changes your view on how you should deal with other people, and it's almost a philosophical book. So I'd say it's a read for everyone, salespeople or not.
Oh, I agree. That was actually sort of preempt my next question, which was one book that every salesperson should read. You would recommend 7 Habits?
Yes, seven Habits of Highly Effective People.
Right. But you bring up an interesting point, though, which is the classics are still so valuable. I mean, I have clients read Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's a great book. And tells you how to deal with people that's still so incredibly relevant today.
Absolutely. There's a lot of great stuff out there, and I think you can't underrate the classics. There's another I ran across just recently. The Score Takes Care of Itself by Bill Walsh.
That's a great book.
Yeah, there's no dearth of classics out there, so maybe start with those.
All right. So last question for you, and this is, some people think it's the toughest question. We'll see for you. It's, what music's on your playlist these days?
I have kind of a broad range of stuff that I like to listen to. I think lately I, for work, have actually been listening to the Revenant soundtrack. It's Ryuichi Sakamoto,
right?
And it's very, very intense, but kind of, I don't know, gets that serious vibe going on. A couple others I've been kind of listening to on repeat. I've always been a big fan of Gigamesh. Mm-hmm. Let's see. I think Zara Larson's had some pretty good stuff. Kiara. I like electronic stuff. Can't get away from Drake these days. I mean, gotta give a shout out to Drake.
Both literally and figuratively. You turn on the TV and there he is.
Exactly.
All right. Well, good. Well, Nic, thanks for joining me. Tell folks how they can find out more about you and Bowery Capital and your podcast.
Thanks so much, Andy.
So, tell people how they can find you.
Oh, yes. You can find me at BoweryCap.com and also NicPoulos.com, which is NICPOULOS.
Okay, great. Like I said, make sure to listen to Nic's podcast. And remember, friends, make it a part of your day every day to deliberately learn something new to help you accelerate your success. And easy way to do that is to make this podcast a part of your daily routine, either listening on your commute, in the gym, or as part of your morning sales meeting. That way you won't miss any of my conversations with top business experts like my guest today, Nic Poulos, who shared his expertise about how to accelerate the growth of your business. So thanks for joining me. Until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone. Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.